Good evening and welcome to the virtual performance and value for money select committee held by virtue of new regulations introduced by the government. I'm Councillor Riaz Ahmed and I'll be chairing the meeting tonight. The regulations have temporarily removed the legal requirement for local authorities to hold public meetings in person. This will enable councils to make effective and transparent decisions on the delivery of services for their residents. The requirement for public meetings to be made accessible to the public remains, and the link to the virtual meeting is available on the council's website in the usual live meeting link page. If a connection to a member is lost during the meeting, I will stop the meeting to enable the connection to be restored. If the connection cannot be restored within a reasonable time, the meeting will proceed, but the member who was disconnected will not be able to vote on the matter under discussion, as they would not have heard all the facts. Should any aspect of the external link fail, I may call a short adjournment for up to 5 minutes or so to determine whether the connection can quickly be re-established, either by video technology or telephone in the alternative. If the connection is not restored within that time, the meeting will be adjourned and any further business will not proceed until another time and date. Firstly, can I ask the clerk to ask the other members to confirm their attendance, please?
Thank you, Chair. Councillor Byrne? Councillor Byrne?
Present.
Thank you. Councillor Hack?
Present.
Councillor Hartness?
Present.
Councillor Fithian?
Present.
Councillor Salamat?
Present.
Councillor Shuttleworth?
Present.
Councillor Stretton?
Present.
And Councillor Ahmed?
Present.
Thank you, Chair.
So yeah, we have a full house. We also have officers in attendance to advise the committee. When the committee comes to take a vote on a report for approval, each member will be individually asked to state whether they are for, against, or abstaining. When a report is for noting, I will only ask if any member does not agree. Should the exclusion of the press and public be agreed in meeting to enable the committee to discuss private reports, the press and public will no longer be able to view the meeting. We can now turn to the agenda, and for the benefit of those members of the public watching, the full agenda pack is available on the council's website. Item 1 is apologies for absence. I think we have a full house, so we
have everyone here, Chair. Thank you.
Excellent. Any items of urgent business?
We have none, Chair.
Thank you. Item 3, any declarations of interest? No. We'll move on to item 4, public questions. Have you received any public question?
We have none, Chair. Thank you.
Thank you. In that case, we'll move to item 5, Revenue Monitor and Capital Investment Program 2021 month 8.
Sorry, Chair, could I just interrupt 1 second? There don't appear to be any minutes from last meeting for us to approve.
If I could answer that, Chair, that's because we don't bring minutes to the budget meeting. They will all go to the next ordinary meeting at PVFM.
I think we got enough to have a go at Garth.
We do.
For one evening. Thank you. So, Anne Ryan, if you can present item 5, please.
Yes, thank you, Chair. So members of the committee will recall that we've been bringing monthly financial monitoring reports through to the Select Committee throughout the financial year, and also financial update reports. So this is the latest report. It is the month 8 revenue and capital position, and it is an important report because it does influence the contents of the 21-22 revenue budget report and the capital strategy that we'll be considering a little later on the agenda. So from a revenue perspective, it does confirm the pressures in this financial year and anything that needs to be addressed in 21-22. And the projected outturn position also gives an indicator of our likely reserves position at the year end. So looking at the revenue position in a little more detail, the trends at month 8 are in the main pretty similar to those that have been presented to the committee in previous months. Our overall projected outturn is an £8.3 million variance, which is pretty close to the month 7 position that was reported to Cabinet on Monday this week. But I'm advising the committee, and it's included in the paper, although not reflected in the numbers because there is some confirmation required, that I think that we will be able to bring in as close to a balanced position by the year end as possible, because I'm anticipating some additional contributions from external partners, some additional funding from central government and other agencies, and also reflective of the continued management actions that are taking place to control expenditure. So hopefully by the end of the year, all of that will have removed that adverse variance, subject to there being nothing untoward happening between now and the year end. Well, position could change and it will be kept under review. The summary tables are presented at pages 5 and 12 of the report, which give the overarching outline, and the variance of 8.3 is split between COVID related at 6.8 million and business as usual related items at 1.3. So we have, as we've had in previous months, a couple of major areas that are presenting a challenge from a business as usual perspective, and that's the Community Health and Adult Social Care Service and Children's Social Care Services, for the same reasons, the demand pressures and the complexity of cases that are being dealt with by those respective services. The report also advises of the DSG position, and what's good news is there that the projected deficit on the DSG in this financial year is forecast to reduce, with a proposed position that will bring the DSG back into surplus by the financial year 23-24. The HRA shows a healthy balance, and we'll have a HRA paper further on in the agenda. And I'll just draw members' attention also to the collection fund position, because clearly the collection of council tax and business rates has been somewhat challenged during the pandemic. There is a deficit in relation to that. We are taking advantage of some of the facilities that the government has allowed in terms of spreading the deficit over future financial years. But I'll also draw members' attention to a sum of almost £25.5 million, which is an impact on the business rates position. So when we build at the start of the financial year, we build all businesses. However, the government then introduced retail, hospitality, leisure and nursery 100% business rate relief, which means that they are paying us a grant for that instead of us collecting the money off individual businesses. And as you will see when we get into the budget report, we have to make a technical adjustment for that during 21-22. So it does feature in the report further on. And just finally, in relation to the capital programme, the programme has been reprofiled in this financial year, and clearly, as I've indicated, is reflected in the capital strategy paper that we'll consider later on. Profiled expenditure is expected to be just over £81 million in this financial year, and it's fully financed, and I'm not expecting any additional variations to that between now and the year end. So I'm happy to take any questions.
Thank you. Councillor Jawar, you wish to add anything at this stage?
Yes, Chair, just a minor point. So as Anne highlighted, on page 12 and 13, you'll see that £6.8 million is attributed to COVID-related expenditure and loss of income. Now, you know that the government has repeatedly said that they will refund us for the cost of that, both the expenditure and loss of income. So if they were able to give us that money, then our situation will be a whole lot better. So I just thought it was worth highlighting that point, Mr. Chairman.
Yeah, thank you. I was going to explore that point a bit further. Yeah, thank you very much. If I may, if I go to table 2.3 on page 5, I think the figure Councillor Jawaz mentioned 6.8 million. It tells you where it's come from. So my question was 6.8 million. If I read it correctly, that is what we have spent from our finances, and we haven't had the funding for. Because out of total 8.3 million overspent, 6.8 is because of the COVID-19, which has not been refunded to us.
Yes, that's correct. I am anticipating, as I indicated, a further tranche of central government support for lost sales fees and charges, but I haven't anticipated that sum in the projections as yet. But I'm not at this point expecting any other central government specific funding to support the general position that we have here. I should point out as well that we have had over £24 million of support, unring-fenced support, so that I suppose should indicate to you the level of expenditure that we have been incurring, or income that's been lost, because of course it's a combination of both in this financial year as well. On top of that, we've had over 17 million pounds worth of specific grants that have come in to support the COVID response as well. They are detailed in the month 8 position, although actually since we prepared this report we've been notified of some additional grants on top of that.
But it's also fair to say that this is up to month 8 and the expenditure continues to be incurred. So 6.8 million was at end of month 8 will be much higher now, and it will be higher next month and month after.
Well, we're hoping that this is a reasonable forecast of the year-end outturn position, but it could change. So I'm mindful that given the fact that we're in a pandemic and it's unprecedented times, everything that you have regard to in all of the papers this evening are best estimates based on our reasonable position that we can forecast.
Right, thank you. Yeah. Thanks for that. Members wish to ask any questions or make any comment? I don't see any hands up. If not, can I ask members to note the report? Any members who does not agree, please raise your hand. Thank you. In that case, that report is noted, and we will move on to the next item, which is the most item 6, social tax reduction, item 6. Anne, over to you.
Thank you. So this is the council tax reduction scheme for 21-22. So we are required to have a council tax reduction scheme to support residents who qualify for assistance in paying council tax. And we must consider each year whether the council is going to amend or replace its scheme. If there are any changes, we have to go through a consultation process, firstly with the major preceptor, which in the context of Oldham Council is GMCA on behalf of the Mayor, and the Mayor in his role as Police and Crime Commissioner. There have been no proposals to change the scheme, so no consultation was required. I should have mentioned also the consultation should be with the public as well as just however, because of the issues and the implications around a council tax reduction scheme, there is an EIA attached, a quality impact assessment attached to the report. So the report outlines a proposal to maintain the scheme as it is, which means that we will provide a maximum support of 85% of council tax for a Band A property. And that's obviously the recommended option, but there is the illustration of an alternative, which would be a reduction in support to 82.5% of a Band A council tax for a property. I think it's important to point out that during this financial year, because of the pandemic, the numbers of residents who've been able to seek council tax reduction support has gone up considerably. So the report outlines that in April there was just under 14,000 recipients, and that's moved to in January in this month to just under 16,000, so quite a considerable shift. What that does, it has the impact on the council's position of reducing the amount of council tax that we can actually collect. And Cabinet on the 14th of December received a paper which outlined the impact of that in the context of the council tax base for 21-22. So that is reflected in our budget papers. One thing to mention in this financial year, the government has provided some support for individual council tax recipients in the form of hardship relief. So the council's been administering that, which is a payment of £150 into the council tax account of a council tax reduction recipient of working age. And we've also been able to have regard to universal credit and housing benefit earnings disregards in providing support to council tax recipients. The government is not continuing the hardship grant for 21-22 in the way that it has in this financial year, but it has provided support to the council for the impact in terms of the reduced council tax base. So I'll mention it here, but it does feature in our main budget report. The council will be receiving a local council tax support grant of £3.183 million in 21-22, and there's also a local tax income guarantee for which a benefit of £1 million has been anticipated in 21-22, and they are as a direct result of the reduced ability of the council to collect or to charge council tax because of the increased number of recipients of council tax reduction. So the report recommends the continuation of the unchanged council tax reduction scheme, but also suggests that should the council's financial position be amenable during the year, then there might be the opportunity to provide some additional support for individual council tax payers via the exceptional hardship support scheme.
Thank you, Anne. Councillor Jabbar, anything to add to that?
Just a couple of sentences, Chair. Just to say that despite a huge increase in the number of council tax reduction claimants, we decided, Chair, to keep the scheme that's been operating this year for next year as well, because we believe this is important support to people who are on low income, and that's why we're keeping this scheme as it is.
Excellent. Thank you very much. That's huge relief for the people concerned. I've got a couple of hands already. Councillor Harkness, you were first, and then Councillor Shuttleworth.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. So Anne, you touched on about the hardship fund of those, what it was, £150 or something, wasn't it, each? And you said the government aren't providing that, but have provided some additional funding to the council. Is there what's the gap between those two sort of figures from this year and last year, and how will that have any impact on those poorest households, or will they see no change at all?
So the hardship scheme this financial year, the council's received £3,015,000 to operate the scheme, and the council, the local council tax support grant for 21-22 is £3.183 million. So they're fairly comparable. The difference is the hardship fund is specifically payable to those council tax recipients and compensates the council in effect for not billing those individuals for that £150. For 21-22, the funding comes into the council because it's unable to, the way that it's being presented in the budget is the council's unable to collect as much council tax, so its ability to raise its own revenue has gone down, and the government is using this mechanism to compensate the council. So in this year, there was funding available to the individual council taxpayers. That's not going through that mechanism for next year. Hence the recommendation in the report that should the council's financial position be in a position where it can look to provide some additional support for individual council tax reduction recipients through the exceptional hardship scheme, then it will look to do so during the year.
Thank you. Graham?
Thanks, Chair. And you made reference to an increase of about 2,000 residents who are now able to secure a tax reduction, council tax reduction. What sort of impact financially does that have on the figures, and how do you actually build in for something like that? And you take into account this coming 12 months. Nobody knows when it's going to end. Nobody knows what may follow. How can you actually build in for something like that?
So the actual impact, it is quite difficult to estimate because the numbers are changing. all the time. And if the pandemic continues and the numbers of individuals coming through who are eligible for council tax reduction continues to increase, then that will represent a financial challenge. One of the issues that's at the quirk of the way that local government financing operates is that council tax and business rates, for that matter, are collected in a particular financial year, but the financial impact of that doesn't hit the budget until the following financial year. So should in 2021 the numbers of individuals in receipt of council tax reduction continue to increase, there will have to be a compensating matter for that in the 22-23 budget. What we have done for 21-22 is, as I've just indicated a moment ago, the local council tax supports scheme grant, which government is giving us, is helping us to continue with our council tax reduction scheme. The government's acknowledging that we can't raise the same level of council tax because there's a lower number of billing opportunities, shall we say, and the government's giving us that granting compensation. However, it's not an exact match because the figures will keep changing, but it's as good as we can get it at this point in time.
That's it. Can I ask a follow-up question?
Yeah, sure, yeah.
With my chair. And when we have the council tax reduction, we also have the council tax. We have a precept for GMFRS and the police, adult social care. When we grant a council tax reduction, does that impact on those figures, or are we still liable as a local authority for 100% of those precepts?
So we will have to pay the precepts over to the preceptors. However, what they get is a share of the cost, in a sense, because if there is a deficit on the collection fund, which is if we have precepted to take more funds than is available, as I've indicated, it kind of runs a year in arrears, and they take a share of the loss, as in the amount that we haven't been able to collect, and that's adjusted through their budget the following financial year, just the same way that it is with ours. So eventually they'll take a share of the loss. The cash impact is direct to us in the year that it occurs, but we will get the resourcing back, shall we say, through them in future years.
Thanks, Anne. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. If there's no more questions, can the members agree with the proposal? I need a mover and seconder.
Move, Chair.
Thank you.
Second, Chair.
Thank you. That's seconded. Moved and seconded. All those in favour will have to do a roll call.
Thank you, Chair. I'll move to the roll call. Councillors are asked whether they are for, against or abstaining. Councillor Byrne?
For.
Councillor Hack?
For.
Councillor Harkness?
For.
Councillor Fithian?
For.
Councillor Salamat?
For.
Councillor Shuttleworth?
For.
Councillor Stretton?
For.
Councillor Ahmad?
For.
That's unanimous, Chair.
Thank you. That is great. Excellent. Well done. Well done to Oldham Council for keeping up the scheme. We now move on to the most substantive item, item 7, Revenue Budget 21-22 and Medium Term Financial Strategy 21-22 to 23-24. The way we're going to do is Councillor Jawar and Anne Ryan will briefly present the report, and then we'll take any questions at that stage, and then we'll go through each appendix. When we come to the savings by each cabinet member, I'm going to ask the cabinet member and their officer to briefly, very briefly, introduce them if they have anything specific to say. I don't expect them to go through each item in detail, but there might be questions. So we'll see how it goes. Councillor Jawar and Anne, if you can introduce the item, please.
Thank you very much, Chair. I'll go first. So as you'll see from the paper, in terms of producing a balanced budget for next financial year, that's 2021-2022, then we're requiring £27.908 million. That's the gap. So why is the gap? Well, the gap is there, Chair, because we have been receiving reduced grant from central government, and also we have seen an increase in demands in certain areas. So, for example, we've seen increasing demands in adult social care and children's services. So this has been happening for the last 10 years, and over the last 10 years, Chair, we've lost more than £16 million from our budget. And in the papers today, you'll see that we've brought some proposals. Some of those proposals, we don't want to go ahead with them, but we've been forced to do so because of the requirement to produce a balanced budget. Now, Chair, I'm extremely grateful to the government for the grants they've given to businesses in Oldham as a result of the outbreak of COVID-19, and also some financial support that's given to us. But the problem that we've got is that the local government finance has been broken for a number of years. We have lobbied government, we have lobbied MPs, we have lobbied our trade organisation, the Local Government Association. Despite that, when the Chancellor announced a spending review, we didn't get anything extra to help us with the problem that we've got. So in this spending review, what happened was that the Chancellor announced a £2.5 billion increase in core spending. Now, 87% of that he is expecting local authorities to raise through increase in council tax. The council tax can be increased by up to 5%. So that's 2% for general element and 3% for adult social care. Now, what's happening there, Chair, is that, again, the government is very cleverly shifting the burden, the financial burden, to local taxpayers who are already struggling. And in my view, this is not at all acceptable, and is certainly not fair. And that's the reason why we've got the problem that we've got in terms of the budget proposals before you, and also the proposed council tax increase. If I may just very quickly touch on the key figures that is in consideration for you at this meeting. So firstly, as I've said, the gap is nearly £28 million. The exact figure is 27.908 million. So what we're doing, so that equates, in terms of balancing that, it equates to 97.28 full-time equivalent posts that are being deleted from the establishment, which is equating to £8.92 million of budget saving proposal. So those are the ones, the 43 that's before you. They're called the BR1 forms that you mentioned at the introduction of this item. Also, Chair, in terms of then what else are we using to balance the budget? We're having to use £17.115 million of reserves. We're also having to use £2 million of flexible capital receipt to help fill the gap in order to produce a balanced budget. Now, Anne mentioned in her report earlier, there's also £25.46 million of technical reserves that we're using, and when Anne comes to her presentation, she will pick that up. It's basically grants that we received this year. It's been carried forward, so we'll be using it next year. And of course, the main issue is, well, Chair, that we're proposing to increase the council tax by 2.99%. So that's broken into two parts. The first part is 0.99 increase in general, and then 2% is increases in adult social care. So those are the key consideration before you, Chair. As you said at the beginning, that there are cabinet members and officers here to give you detailed answer an explanation for each of the 43 budget saving proposals. I'm happy, obviously, as a cabinet member for finance, to answer the question related to my proposal, but also anything general. I'll hand over to Anne now, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Jabbar. Anne?
Yes, I'll do an overview. I will try not to repeat what Councillor Jabbar has said, but clearly I'll try and put a bit of context around the paper. I think it's fair to say that this has been the most challenging budget process that I've ever had to work with. Clearly, in the middle of a pandemic, lots and lots of uncertainty, which has made things quite challenging. And as I mentioned in one of the in the overview on one of the earlier papers, everything has to be considered as best estimates at this point in time because things could change. As I mentioned, the month 8 report is the basis of looking at the council's trends and key issues that need to be addressed in the 21-22 budget. Also have to have regard to the provisional local government finance settlement and any other local policy issues, such as the council tax recommendation. The report does concentrate on the financial year 21-22, but it is a medium-term financial strategy, so does look ahead to 22-23 and 23-24. Now, you'll probably be aware that, of course, in previous financial years, we've looked at a 5-year financial forecast, but having regard to all the uncertainties, I felt it was appropriate to reduce the forecast time horizon to 3 years. This time last year, when the budget report for 2021 was prepared, the estimated gap for 21-22 was just over £23 million, and that was a reasonable estimate, and perhaps without the pandemic may well have been where we would have been at this time. But that was based on a number of assumptions, including a council tax increase of 3.99%. 1.99 for general purposes and 2 for the adult social care precept. With that in mind, and with a range of other things that have happened during the year, the financial forecast that was actually considered at this select committee, I think in September or October, was that the budget gap had reduced, increased, I should say, to £30 million. And the estimates have been updated again in light of all the most up-to-date information, including the provisional settlement, which is clearly has a significant influence. And that was received on December the 17th, with a consultation period closing on January the 16th. So after the consultation period closes, the government will reflect on responses and then will issue us the final settlement. In the past, there have been some changes between the provisional and the final settlement figures, helpfully in our favour, but we'll see. I'm not expecting any significant changes, but there are still a number of items that make up the budget process which are still to be confirmed. Some grants, and clearly, as the question was referring to on the last item, the precept figures from the major preceptors and also the parish councils. The settlement information in December largely reflected what we had anticipated from the spending review, which was announced in November. But it is only a 1-year settlement, and we only have certainty around the financial forecasts for government grant funding for 21-22. Which does make that forward look extremely difficult. The report does outline all the financial pressures that I am aware of and all the issues that I am aware of, whether they're tackled specifically with a budget allocation or with the availability of a reserve to support expenditure should it be required. And it does include those 2 items that I referred to, and as I was just questioned on a moment ago, the local council tax support grant and the local tax income guarantee, which were key features of the CTR report. The council has received, as have other local authorities, some new grants this financial for 21-22, including lower tier services grant, but particularly the government is giving us some certainty, I suppose, with regard to the support for COVID-19. So we've received a notification of over £7.7 million that we can work with as a starter in relation to dealing with COVID-19 from April the 1st. That is an unring-fence grant and can be used to deal with any challenges that we have arising from COVID. Having said that, that provisional settlement was, as I've indicated, announced on the 17th of December, and since then we've gone into a national lockdown and the position has moved on. The government has indicated that it will provide additional support, as it has done in this financial year. So I'm assuming at some point we may get a further notification. I can only build in what I'm aware of at this point in time. The methodology for dealing with COVID pressures is outlined in page 146 and 147 of the report, because I am conscious that it is a moving position. As Councillor Jabbar outlined, the key policy change in relation to the budget is the change in the council tax proposal. And as he indicated, the government is expecting local authorities to increase council tax up to the maximum available, which is 5%. Having regard to the council tax proposal that we're considering this evening, again, as Councillor Jabbar advised, there is a requirement for us to find savings to balance the budget of just under £28 million. But again, I have to mention that technical adjustment of £25.5 million, which is a result of the government awarding business rates relief to retail, hospitality and leisure businesses during 2021 after the budget had been set. So it is compensating us for that in this year. It will create a problem in relation to the collection fund, which is where council tax and business rates are accounted for, and that will be rectified next year. So having regard to that, it actually raises the budget gap to over £53 million. As I've indicated, 25.5 of that is solved straight away by the funding that the government is providing, but it does look very strange when you look at the budget paper. And again, as Councillor Jabbar outlined, there is a combination of budget reductions, which we'll consider in a moment, and flexible use of capital receipts and reserves to support the budget. One of the key points of the report does highlight that we are relying on reserves quite significantly to support the 21-22 budget, but also, as I've indicated, the report is a medium-term financial strategy that looks at future financial years, and looking at the savings requirements for those future financial years, there is also a use of reserves projected to support 22-23. So in total, a fund of £29 million has been pulled together to support the budget over 2 financial years. So in addition to the use of reserves in 22-23 that I've outlined, which is just over £12 million, the council will be undertaking a significant transformation programme that will be looking at budget savings with regard to 4 major themes: place-based integration and communities, children's services, health and care, and economy. And all of those, the strategy to balance the budget in future years is set out in section 17 of the report. In addition to those 4 areas, there is also a range of cross-cutting proposals and savings areas that will be looked at as well. So focusing on the future years is also a key task for us as we move into 21-22. Targets have been set for each of the transformation programmes. They are challenging, but the progress will be reviewed as we go through 21-22, and a lot of activity is taking place to enable us to deliver those challenging targets over time. But it is a moving position, and it will be subject to constant review, and clearly will come back for scrutiny at this committee.
Thank you. Thanks, Anne. Thanks, Councillor Jabbar. Are there any questions or comments at this stage before we go into the appendices? Garth?
Yeah, quickly. I know Councillor Gerard and Dan have sort of raised similar things in previous meetings and so on. I suppose it's about what point we become, bankrupt in for better a word. I know you've talked about you've got the 3-year forecast, but this is a 1-year settlement, and we don't really know what's going to happen after that. And I know for the several months when you've been coming each month to the committee, some of the answers to the questions of what happened is, well, we don't know because they haven't told us. So I suppose based on all these uncertainties and stuff, I don't know whether I think last time I asked the question, I can say, well, yeah, we're making a balanced budget. We can do it this year, but then possibly next year we're going to get to a stage where keep using these reserves. We just can't carry on much longer. Do we know, based on the trajectory we're on at the moment, when that might be?
If I just come in on that, I mean, what I'm presenting this evening is a programme, a financial plan that if everything goes according to plan and the transformation programme is delivered and the forecast of expenditure and forecast of income from central government are as I projected, or grants I should say, then the council will be able to deliver a balanced position over a 3-year financial horizon. So that is the way that the report has been prepared and is being projected. So I can only advise you at this point in time, the budget and the arrangements that are in place to deliver that budget over a 3-year horizon are robust. However, a lot can change. So as I've indicated, what will need to happen is there'll be a constant drive forward with the transformational programme, frequent reporting, and if there are any changes, both in terms of the anticipated central government support or local conditions, then there'll have to be a report to members to advise of the change position. But right now, what you have in front of you is a robust plan.
Councillor Jawad, did you want to add something to that?
Yes, please, Chair, if you would please allow me. Yeah, thanks, Councillor Harkness. That's a really good question. So obviously, right, we're doing everything we can to produce a balanced budget because that's the responsible thing to do. I think electorate in Oldham wouldn't thank us if we didn't have a balanced budget. And in any case, Anne, as a Section 151 officer, she's not going to allow us to set not to set a balanced budget. So I can assure you, right, in terms of management of the finance in Oldham, we're on top of it and we'll do whatever we can with the resources available. But here's the real issue. The real issue is each year this is getting a real challenging position. I talked about the adult social care funding. Well, the government has delayed no less than 6 times the white paper on it. And the white paper promised us to provide funding and a way of resolving the problem that we got in adult social care. Now, instead of getting that, what we're seeing is the demand is increasing every year. Almost every month, the demand is increasing. Now, that's a good thing that our old elderly people are living longer because they contributed to this town, especially working in the cotton mills in difficult circumstances. So they deserve the utmost care that we can give them, the dignity that we can give them. I'm completely up for that. But the issue is that this is a central government funding issue and they're not giving it. Boris Johnson, when he took over the Prime Minister, on the steps of Downing Street, he promised that he will resolve this issue and he will deal with it as a priority. What are we saying? Nothing. And you can't. During this pandemic, what has come out is that local government is a brilliant institution to provide services to local community. The government has recognized that. But despite recognizing that, when it came to providing the core funding, what have they said? Well, go and increase the council tax by 5% to deal with it. 3% for adult social care expenditure and 2% for general. Well, Chair, Gareth, colleagues, this isn't a sustainable model, certainly not in Oldham. Council tax in Oldham is far too high. That's why we didn't take the full 5%. We went for 2.99 because we've got to be mindful of this financial situation of the residents in Oldham. But it is a central government issue. The Prime Minister has recognised it, senior politicians have recognised it, but sadly they've not done anything about it. And unless they do something about it, Chair and Gareth, I'm afraid we are going to have to be managing this in a very, very difficult way. And each year we'll have to reduce the key services that we provide to produce a balanced budget.
Thank you. Graham, Councillor Sherworth.
Thanks, Chair. It's also a question on the adult social care, and as Councillor Jabbar just pointed out, the Prime Minister did say he had a plan ready to go. The trouble is nobody's sure where it's gone. But all we know is that the residents of Oldham are continually expected to pay an extra 2% or thereabouts for adult social care, much needed as it is. Are you in a position to tell us how much this now generates, how much did it generate, and how short is it in terms of meeting the needs of people in Oldham? Thanks, Chair.
If I could just answer, the 1% increase in council tax generates £957,000. So for every 1%, that's basically the figure. Just with regard to the adult social care precept, the legislation is only in place to enable it to be charged in 21-22. The provisional settlement does allow local authorities to stagger the 3% maximum over 2 financial years, but it has not been formalised yet. So if there was a requirement, and I think that is our proposal, to charge a further 1% in 21-22, that could happen. However, there is no legislation in place to allow for another precept to be put into place for 22-23. So the government would have to put some legislation in place. I think the reason for that is the expectation that the white paper, or the government policy that Councillor Jabbar was referring to, would have been issued well before now, that there would be some clarity about the way that adult social care would be funded in the future. And there wouldn't be perhaps a necessity for the adult social care precepts in future years, but we shall have to see. Clearly, just with regard to our budget process, we are passporting the adult social care precept to adult services, as is the statutory requirement. And as you will see in the budget report, we are also providing additional support on top of the adult social care precept to the service. But also, I suppose the government would argue that they're providing some additional grant support for that. But it is social care in the round, not just adult social care. The government grant is for social care, which is adults and children's. So the council, as part of its budget projections, is increasing the funding for both adults and children's social care beyond the level of central government additional support.
Thank you.
Thanks, Alan. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Next, I've got Councillor Hawke.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Obviously, it's been difficult for us. Well, ever since I've been a council, every year the government been cutting our funds for Oldham Council, and it has been difficult. I just want to know, I know due to COVID, a lot of things has changed, and this year, especially last year, the business rate, we couldn't collect all the business rate due to COVID. So has the government done anything about that? Are they providing any finance to cover that?
Support. There is, at this point in time, there is no notification of any support for business beyond the 31st of March. So all the grants that the council is administering should have expired by the time we get to the end of the financial year. But as you know, in relation to business support, there's been lots and lots of different regimes introduced since March 2020. And so I would anticipate that there might be further support in 21-22. However, because we're operating to a degree as an agent of central government in that, it wouldn't impact on our budget itself, because they should fully fund all the support for that assistance to business. Does that answer your question?
Because we couldn't collect the business rate and we let business off for that, and has the council subsidized that?
Oh, sorry.
Government.
Question on, sorry, I misunderstood the question. I thought it was a question on business grants. So with regard to business rates, what has happened in this financial year, as I've kind of indicated in a sense with that technical adjustment of 25 million, the government has provided businesses, certain businesses, with support in relation to business rates. At this point in time, I don't know whether that's going to continue into 21-22. So we're working, and the report is prepared on the basis that we will bill as normal all businesses in Oldham. However, there has been some publicity around the prospect of the current business rates release being carried forward. I would perhaps expect the government to change the way that they target any business rate relief for 21-22, because as you'll be aware, many significant retailing businesses have actually refunded the government with the support they've had, so Tesco, Sainsbury's, etc. So I suspect it would be pointless to actually do that again. But in the context of any impact on the council's budget through businesses being unable to pay, that manifests itself in the collection fund in this financial year. We have to deal with that lost income, but that comes back to, in a sense, some of the items I was referring to earlier. The government is giving us the mechanisms to deal with that. It is giving some additional grant support, local tax income guarantee, which we will be able to claim a grant, and it's also very generously enabling us to carry the deficits across 3 financial years rather than 1. But I have to say the government has provided some support for the council, so it's not all bad news.
Okay, then thank you, Anne.
Thank you. I don't see any more hands up, so I know that we will discuss this overview, and we'll now move on to the appendices. Appendix 1, which is on page 181, outlines Oldham Council policies and strategies. I'm going to take all these papers as read, so I'm just going to invite if any member has got any questions on this, on Appendix 1, which is the Oldham Council policies and strategies. If not, we'll move on to Appendix 2, which is to do with dedicated schools grant. Any questions or comment? No, thank you. Council 3 is the base calculation 21-22 for council tax, technical exercise. Any questions, comments? Appendix 4, current budget position, and we've been here many times. Any questions or comments? So we'll now move on to Appendix 5, which I imagine most of the discussion will be there. As I said at the start, the way we're going to do is we're going to take them in bundles. So like Councillor Johan has got his bundle at the top of the paper, we'll do his bundle. I'm not going to ask any cabinet member or director to go through each item individually, but if they want to briefly outline the whole section in just a few sentences, please feel free. We'll just move on to questions and answer them. So Councillor Johan and Mark Warren.
Thank you, Councillor Ahmed. I will introduce this item. I think some of this has already been said. We need to look into the context of where we are and why where we are. Thus, before even the COVID, we had a shortfall of 2.4 million in our social care funding, which obviously significantly accelerated after COVID. We also have a significantly deprived community with various health inequalities, which also creates pressures on our social care services. So when officers were designing what services to cut to balance our books, the key principle we had in our mind is how to ensure that we provide our statutory responsibilities, fulfill our statutory responsibilities. We also ensure that our residents are as safe and as independent as is possible, and protecting the most vulnerable in our society. I wish I had meeting today here where I could have said new social care funding formula gives us £100 million more, and hence I'm starting these all new services. But unfortunately, that's not where we are. We have to live within our means. Otherwise, there is a danger that we would fail to protect those who are most vulnerable in our society. I would use this opportunity to thank officers, Mark, Kirsty, and their teams who have been working tirelessly to following these principles. These proposals have gone through our internal discussions, and not one discussion, number of discussions with me as portfolio holder. It's unfortunately that I have to support them, and I do support them because that's the best option we could come up with. So I will hand over to Mark to start with, and then Kirsty will join us as well. Thank you.
Mark.
Thank you, Councillor Chowan. Good evening, everyone. Good evening, Councillor Ahmad. I won't go through each one as has been proposed, but what I would like to say is we totally appreciate that these are really difficult times. As the Director of Adult Social Care, obviously it's my statutory role to make sure that the most vulnerable adults within Oldham are supported when they find themselves in difficulty for a whole range of reasons, and we remain committed and dedicated to actually doing that. I think in terms of the proposals that we've put forward, we note that they are difficult, but what we've tried to do is consider the whole of the portfolio that we operate across a £65 million net programme, and that's one of the highest spends within the council. And taking into account the context of the challenge the council faces set out by Councillor Jabbar and Anne Ryans, our Section 151 officer, then obviously adult social care needs to contribute to that financial challenge that we face. So across adult social care, the entire team has tried to work through to look at efficiencies to actually cause as least pain as we're possibly able to in trying to reduce the budget. And the proposals that you can see set out in front of you, which are highly detailed, set out 12 proposals for either redesigning, transforming or reducing services that would propose savings and achieve savings over a 24-month programme in the region of £4.2 million. So adult social care departments across the country are redesigning and transforming themselves to respond to a new agenda, to respond to the fact that demands are growing. And if we don't change the approach, then all that will happen is that considerable cost increases year on year will increase. So we've tried to consider the demographics in terms of the challenges that the borough faces, not only now, but over the next 5 and 10 years, and how we can most efficiently and effectively and using best value principles support the people who were charged to ensure can lead great lives here in Oldham. The context that we've set the efficiency savings are within the national context of integration, and one of the requirements is that community health services and social care services, working together with our voluntary sector colleagues and independent sector providers, work more closely together with primary care services to deliver more effective services for the people that we serve. And I suppose just by way of summary, then the council has a series of statutory legal requirements we will still have to meet regardless of the proposals that have been set out. And those 12 proposals actually acknowledge that the council has a legal duty to provide a whole range of services for people when they find themselves in need of that safety net and that support. And as Councillor Chowan has said, we've tried to achieve a balance between ensuring that we can still retain a preventative, proactive approach to supporting the most vulnerable across the age ranges of 14 right through to our most elderly service user at 106. And what we've tried to do is ensure that we're still able to meet our legal duties. So in terms of the detail at this particular point in time, I assume that we'll now take any questions that people would have. Councillor Ahmad, so I'll leave it at that.
Thank you very much, Mark. That's useful. I'll take the liberty of ask my question first, and then I'll bring Garth in. Mark, we all know your department financially is always stretched because of the demand and because of the work that you do. It's all understandable. But now you're promising huge savings. I've got two questions. One, is that possible? Are you going to be able to deliver the savings that you promised? And two, in the redesign, obviously there's going to be some difficult decisions. How are you going to take the members with you? Thank you.
Okay. So in terms of the first question, how confident am I? I think I would be a fool to actually sit here and say I will guarantee that I will deliver on that £4.2 million over 4 years, because there are circumstances beyond my control that would contribute to those. So, for example, one of the proposals which actually looks at reconfiguring our integrated intermediate care tier through the reconfiguration of Medlock Court and Butler Green. That's 2 different intermediate care sites providing currently over 60 units. In terms of looking at a different approach to that, there are many variables which I can't control. However, in terms of that £4.2 million, we are committed to actually ensuring that if we didn't feel that we could do it, we wouldn't have put it on the table. In terms of one of the big questions, and I would like to say this if that's okay, I'm very conscious, Councillor Ahmed, you work into a tight time frame here. But if you look at the first one, in terms of BR 1423, that one alone actually is £2.5 million, which is a really high figure. Now that one alone actually consists of 2 elements, and if you would be so good as just to give me 30 seconds on the illustration, that's £2.5 million in 2 areas. The first thing is to actually change the conversation as a council and social care department we have with Oldham residents. So the first bit one revolves around £1.5 million of savings related to a strength-based approach. So we'll start to have different conversations, not just assessments, conversations with people that we look to support, and we start with what they are able to do, what their aspirations are, what the capabilities are, what worked for them before they had a problem, and how often do we connect people into community resources. We don't do that well enough. So regardless of the savings, we had a duty to actually work with people in a very different way in 2021. So I'm confident that we can achieve that £1.5 million. And the second element of the second element of that particular proposal is assistive technology. In 2021, we should be using technology far more effectively than we are to support people to manage risks in a very different way than we did 10 years ago. And therefore the £1 million that we had to add to that, working alongside MyoCare and a strength-based approach, I think is a realistic expectation. It's an ambitious one, and I think all the costs that we've put in are ambitious, but the team wants to deliver on these with a minimal amount of input. So in terms of confidence, I am committed and dedicated to achieving it, but I need to be clear, if I'm sat here in 2 years and you're questioning me that some of these have so many different variables to them, then that creates a challenge. And then in terms of your second point, and I know Councillor Chowan wants to come along, then in terms of working with elected members, then every single day of my working life, I work with elected members across the borough on a range of issues that are raised with us in terms of how we try and support people. And as a department, we try and take an open and transparent, honest approach to doing that. And I work closely with Councillor Chowan as the Health and Social Care member. We meet every 2 weeks to discuss the challenges the department faces. And I will take, in terms of the political lead and the views of the group through Councillor Chowan. And that's the way that we've worked for nearly 2 years now.
Thank you. Councillor Chauhan, I think you wanted to come in at that stage.
Thank you, Chair. I think just to assure colleagues, and Mark is absolutely right, it's difficult challenge, but what's my key responsibility is as an elected member and as a cabinet member for whole Oldham Health and Social Care is to ensure that our residents are safe. We have a statutory responsibility to meet their needs. So what we will ensure, whether it's money or anything else, doesn't come into the way of ensuring that our vulnerable people are safe. And I'm really sorry to say that if that means that we don't fulfill our targets of achieving savings, then so it to be, and I don't apologize for that. but I would not put the safety of our residents at risk at any cost. And I'm sure that's what the view of Mark is as well. And what Mark did not say, apart from having 2 weekly conversations, we have almost every second day phone calls, or ad hoc phone calls in the middle of evening as well. So that's how closely we work. And I'm proud that our officers and our political leadership is on the same page to make sure that actually safety of our residents and needs of our residents come first.
Thank you, Dr. Chauhan. Garth?
Yeah, thank you, Chair. So my day job is working with young people with autism. So I looked at some of these, and I got a bit of concern with a couple of them. One's the assisted living. Now it says in there that there's already a projected overspend of 3.2 million, and then obviously want to do 288,000 savings as well on top of that. So that's going to have a massive impact. So how do you propose you're going to do that without sort of affecting quite seriously a lot of vulnerable people? The other one related to autism as well is the wellbeing section, where you're looking to seize the use of the grassroots service. And then I think my other point on this bit is around the personal budgets, where carers are going to effectively lose their personal budgets, which, you know, is again, like I said, obviously, you know, people being carers, it can be quite challenging, and it's a financial problem. And if we lose that, then, you know, it could potentially be that it's going to be a situation where some people are not going to end up being carers, and then that's going to be put back and cost us more in the long run.
Okay. Thank you for raising those issues, Councillor Harkness, and I really appreciate it. I'm fortunate enough to be the lead director representing all the Greater Manchester local authorities to support people with learning disabilities and autism, and absolutely committed and dedicated to ensuring that people who face the most inequality in society are not marginalised as a consequence of these savings, and we're actually absolutely committed to doing that. You're quite right. The financial challenges that we face around the area of learning disability and autism are massive, are absolutely huge, in line with every local authority in this country, for a whole range of reasons. In terms of, I'm very clear of your own professional expertise here, but I'll try and respond to each of the 3 issues that you've raised as briefly as I can, if that's okay. So in terms of the proposals around learning disabilities and autism, which we've actually entitled Achieving Better Outcomes. Please take it the way that I mean it, when I genuinely believe that it does what it says on the tin, that what we're actually trying to do is take a less paternalistic approach and enable people with a learning disability and or autism to absolutely achieve everything they can in their lives. So, for example, in Oldham, we have the lowest rate of employment for people with LD and autism across Greater Manchester at 3.2%, whereas, as you'll be well aware with your professional background, in other locality areas, the average is between 7% and 14%. So how much aspiration do we have for people with learning disabilities and autism to be able to work? So we'll be putting programmes in place to enable people to do that and have meaningful daytime occupation. Some of the other areas are really, if I'm honest, really outdated commissioning models that we have in place, and an approach that sucks people into a system rather than really empowers them to actually achieve their potential, for the best of intent in terms of protecting people from risk, but often preventing people to actually really achieve what they could do in life. And I think that is a crime. So some of the things that we've looked to do is a whole spectrum of different changes that would actually be £788,000 of efficiency savings. So part of that, and I'm trying to be really quick, as I'm conscious of the fact that Councillor Ahmed, I know, will want to move my on, and this is the kind of subject I will talk about all night long if I'm allowed to, as Councillor Chauhan knows, is that our supported housing, exactly as you've said, assisted housing model, is really old-fashioned. The really strange thing is we have so many people with a learning disability and or autism that need housing, but we have so many voids because people don't actually want the housing that's on offer, and the council is actually paying for those voids to the tune of hundreds of thousands of pounds every year because of the models that we've got in place. So either the housing models that we have on offer don't meet what people want. And we shouldn't be getting ourselves into contract arrangements where the council's picking up voids. There are other areas that I know you'll be well aware of, and you hear more and time again, but if you wouldn't mind humouring me, but we have a number of people out of area in really expensive packages of care up to £5,000–6,000 a week that we can't hand on heart are actually say moving the outcome, meeting people's outcomes, and we need to look at supporting them to bring them back. Working with children's colleagues, we have Gerard on the call, in terms of transition. We need to be working with people at a much younger age to help them actually thrive and develop here, and adult services involved much earlier on, so we can look at the art of the possible, and I know that you'll be involved in that with your other hats on. Enablement. For people who actually need re-ablement therapeutic support, people with a learning disability do not have the same access as other people in the population, and we're not prepared to accept that anymore. So we will offer that, but it will bring around savings. And then as a final example to the learning disability and autism approach, and I accept the two are different, Councillor Hardness, in terms of where we're at, but we, as you know, in terms of a good news story, the council spent £4.2 million capital to develop a fantastic new housing with care facility called Hollybank for people with learning disabilities and or autism. And when people find themselves in an emergency situation, rather than have to go out of borough to an emergency, highly expensive provider out of borough, one of those flats will be used as our emergency response facility. So by putting those things together, I genuinely think that we can be more efficient and provide a better service. In terms of the second element that you raised around the Wellbeing Centre and grassroots, I fully take on board your points, and indeed during the consultation very similar issues were raised. But if I can just be clear there, then day services as a consequence of COVID are going through sorry, I wasn't sure if Sean wanted to come in. Then day services are actually going through a revolution, if you like, in terms of the learning from COVID. People have actually used digital platforms far more effectively, and many people want a different type of day service experience now. So what we've actually tried to look at is that MyoCare, who are a council-owned company and work with us as part of the community health and social care arrangement, they operate 2 day services. Again, I know you know this, in Oldham. In terms of grassroots, that offers services to 15 individuals, and Chadderton Park offers services to 23 individuals. We don't think for day services going forward, not just in Oldham, but across the Northwest, that is the most cost efficient and effective way to offer daytime occupation. So what we'll be looking to do is actually redesign the day service model around Chadderton Park. So everybody who is using the grassroots system at the moment, should they so choose, will have the opportunity to transfer through to Chadderton Park, should that be what they want to do. And equally, we've kept a degree of money in the pot to actually know that some people might not want to go to day services anymore as a way of being able to engage with the community, and that we can support them with personal budgets through and direct payments to enable them to connect with communities and undertake meaningful daytime occupation in different ways. So the saving we've put in doesn't represent the full cost effect on that, because we're trying to make a different offer. And then your final point, if I may, with regards to carers, if I just ask my colleague Kirsty Littlewood, who's the Assistant Director for the Adult Social Care Business Support Service, she could just spend a couple of minutes to respond to that, if that would be okay.
Yeah, sure.
Kirsty?
Thanks, Mark. So in relation to carers, I think it's helpful to just provide a little bit of context. So the last couple of years, we've seen a 26% increase in carers accessing support from us. And in the last sort of 6 months, that's increased by another fifth again. So we're supporting some 2,200 carers a year, a significant increase over the last few years. And actually our current model isn't sustainable. And we need something more than a one-off budget being provided to carers, because it's around that effective long-term support to them. So it's looking at a different way of creating a sustainable model of support, and it's looking at how we offer training, strength-based approaches, access to technologies, but that's alongside a personal budget, and acknowledging that in some exceptional circumstances, actually we might need to award more significant budgets to carers as well, that supports them in their caring role and also avoids that need for costly longer term interventions. So I think a really good example is that we provided quite a significant one-off budget to a carer for the purchase of a riser recliner chair, and that meant that herself and her husband continued to be able to live independently with control of their own lives in their own home without paid support ongoing. But alongside that, we provided emotional support, information, advice, assistive technology, and it's how we harness all those different things together to bring a holistic offer to carers. And it's also juggling that with the difficult position we find ourselves in around funding for services going forward. And I think it's interesting, we've got the Carers Partnership Board in Oldham, and we've engaged with them as part of the ongoing budget consultation process, and they did provide a formal response. And actually what they've asked us to think around is that financial hardship for carers and what can we do actually to maximise their income on an ongoing basis, not through a one-off payment, but actually access to benefits, expert advice, support to access employment, especially where income's reduced because of that caring role. So alongside that, we are going to consider how do we do things slightly differently to bring a sustainable income through to carers, and also strengthen that support for carers in a systematic way. So it's not just that 2,200 people that actually approach adult social care, because we know there's so many more carers out in our local communities across Oldham.
Thank you. Thank you for that, Kirsty. I don't see any more hands up. So I think that's all the questions we have for this section. Thank you, Mark. We've got two more items for Councillor Chauhan, so before we let him go, your sports development and school swimming. I think if we take them as read, is there any questions on those two items? If not, before we move on to Amanda Cheriton's items, I think Councillor Chauhan has to go back to his duty, so can we excuse him? Thank you, Councillor Chauhan. Thanks for coming. Next section is for Councillor Cheriton, and she'll be supported by Rebecca Sutcliffe. Amanda?
Okay, thank you. I'll be brief on this because they're relatively self-explanatory mine. So in the reform section of my portfolio, there's lots of proposals that have come forward. One is about budget proposals taken from the district. So one is a reduction in the member ward budgets to take us from £6,000 to £5,000 each, which is a reversal to where we were previously. The second is over the member reserves. So this is a reduction, not a reduction, it's a saving of £127,000. So this is in relation to money that has been left over for schemes that either have been done and paid for from elsewhere or can no longer be done. So that's why, so the impact of that won't be felt, that work has predominantly already been carried out, but we've got that money left. And then the last one is around district realignments. So as members will be aware, we've moved from the 6 districts over to the 5 clusters. So this was discussed 18 months ago, and it was due to come in. It did come in last year because of COVID, and that spread up because of COVID. So we all now work within the 5 clusters, and that's worked really well. And it's a proposal to move forward on that. And what that is a reduction in staff. So each of the 5 clusters will continue with a district caseworker, a district coordinator, and a district community development worker. And it's just taking those down from the 6 posts to the 5 posts. And then the second part of the reform is around the HR staffing review. So this is a saving through some of our staff they've either retired or they have taken VR, and that's where the saving has come from.
Thank you. Thanks, Amanda. Before we take any questions, anything to add, Rebecca or Julia?
No, nothing from me, but of course I can take any questions that members may have.
Thank you. Any questions on these items? We take them as read. Thank you. I think, Amanda, you've done a good job explaining them, so there's no questions. So we've done that. You got another item or two before we let you go?
Yeah, so I've got one more item which falls under Gerard Jones's Directorate in Children's Services and is early help remodelling. Yeah. So it is the budget proposal CHS BR1445. So it's not predicated on a budget saving this year. The budget saving will come forward in further years. And this is essentially around remodelling our early help service. This is about a proposal over the coming years to move down to the 5 clusters, and you essentially have an integrated front door service with children's services, but then everything else that surrounds the 5 clusters. So that is where the saving is predicated on that. What I would caution members on just is on some of the numbers, you know, as we've discussed here and elsewhere, the demand on children's services is massive and continues to be so. What is happening with COVID is our numbers at the moment are slightly skewed, and we don't know realistically what will come out of COVID because there could be a lot of hidden safeguard issues. So just caution with regards to some of the numbers, but that is a proposal to go forward about remodelling our early help, and it can be done. It's not a revolutionary concept. You know, a lot of councils do it in other areas of the country.
Yeah. Thank you. Anything to add, Gerard?
No, I think Amanda's summed it up perfectly. Thank you.
All right, thank you very much. Thanks. I think this is your first visit to this meeting, Gerard, so I can welcome you.
Yeah, what a pleasure.
Thank you. I'm sure you mean that. Thank you. If there's no questions or comments on this section, Amanda, thank you very much for coming.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.
Yes, bye. So then move on to Councillor Brownridge. Barbara?
I'm just
a brief introduction. I'm going to take all the items as read, but it's only any general point you want to make.
Well, just briefly on the proposal, I think the environmental management proposals are quite technical alterations that don't have any staffing implications. The proposed closure of 1 day a week of the gallery, again, doesn't involve any redundancies. It just involves a rejigging of staff rotas, and we'll just reduce the front of house requirements. That's all really. So the important thing is the groups who use the gallery regularly are being consulted so we can try and agree which day of the week it would shut, although logically it was likely to be the beginning of the end of the week. So that's ongoing. Everything else I think is very straightforward in the reports, but obviously if there are any questions, I'll do my best to get the officers to answer them.
Thank you. Officers, have anything to add at this stage? Or shall we go on to questions and answers? No?
No.
Carol?
Nothing to add at this stage, but happy to take any questions.
Members, any questions, comments, observations? I think the way the papers are presented, I mean, there is so much information already given for each section. Yes, you don't leave much room for questions, so.
That's the idea.
Yeah, well, it's worked. It's worked. Well done. Well, if there's no questions for Barbara's section, we'll move on to Councillor Moores. Eddie.
Hi.
Thank you very much.
Good evening. Hi. 2 items in this section. 415, which relates to Madlow. Just a bit of background information. The council currently contributes £400,000 per annum to Madlow and has done so without reduction since Madlow opened. Madlow does receive funding from a number of sources, and be assured the council officers will continue to offer support for Madlow in the future. And we also have the one about Kaching, which is, I refer you to the equality impact assessment with regard to this one. There'll be no impact on the provision as the CCG now pay in and will continue to deliver the service. And just for a bit of reassurance again, it's also in there, the Youth Council were consulted on this and agreed.
Thank you. Any questions, comments on those two? No, sorry, Graham Shuttleworth, Councillor Shuttleworth.
Thanks, Chair. Just one question. In terms of the funding for Madlow, when it first opened, did the local authority give any long-term commitment to financial support for Madlow? And if so, and for what period of time?
I'll just ask Rebecca or Neil just to verify that one. They did, and there was a period of time, but just could one of you just confirm that for me, please?
Do you want me to?
Yeah, you can do, Neil. Go ahead.
So, the original commitment was for 3 years, and that was back in 2012. So we're well beyond that period.
Short but sweet, Neil. Right, and has there been any previous reduction in the funding to Madlow since 2012? Because if you say it was 3 years, that took them to 2015. What has been in place formally, or well, presumably formally since that 3 years lapsed?
Yeah, so there hasn't been any reductions that have been put for. We have put some reductions forward in the past, but they've never been taken. But obviously, we're in that, we're in a really difficult situation now where we've got, real budget challenges. So that's why it's come forward this time. I mean, the arrangement we've got in place is it's an amount of money we give them each year, and that we monitor that over that period of time. We do need to get a little bit tighter on that moving forward about how we monitor that from a funding perspective. But it's just a funding agreement that we've had since the early days.
And are you able to say what sort of conversations you've had with the management at Madlow about this year's cut or reduction, should I say?
Yeah, I don't know if Councillor Moores, you wanted to start that.
Well, certainly, yeah. 2 weeks ago or so now, Neil and Rebecca Sutcliffe and other officers met with members of the Madlow board and had a discussion around that about how we could support them in the future. And there has been other meetings going on in the background, and we do have members of the council, both officers and councillors, on the board.
Thank you. Thanks, Chair.
Thank you. Thanks, Graham. If there's no more questions, Eddie, you want to do the rest of your section on over the page?
Yes, I'm just getting it back up on my screen. It went down then. Thank you. Yes, we've got we've got the reduction in the it's a cost avoidance proposal actually. Oldham Council currently spends more than £11 million per year on out-of-borough placements. If we were able to reduce the number of out-of-borough placements of young people, it will bring the significant financial benefit, as can be seen in the papers. And I'm sure it would have benefits for the young people as well, if we can do that. And the other one is linked to the proposal that you heard from Councillor Chadden a few minutes ago. It's BR1442, and it relates to saving in 2021-2022. It involves remodelling of the Hurley Help Service, which will create an integrated front door within the MASH. And it does link to the proposal that you heard of Councillor Chadden earlier.
Thank you. Got a question from Garth.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. It's relating to the out-of-borough placements. Now, of course, that is always has been desirable for quite some time, and we do have quite a lot of out-of-borough placements, and obviously the high needs budget had previously been significantly overspent. I mean, one of the issues there is that some of those, the reason for a lot of those is the fact that we don't have that provision within the borough, and we still don't have that provision within the borough for a lot of those. So how do you propose that you're going to be able to do that whilst still meeting the needs of those young people?
Shall I answer that?
Yeah,
shall I answer that? Thanks, Garth. We're in a process of remodelling our residential estate. We've got a residential review underway, which is, really part of this process. So we can actually place children more appropriately locally, going to local schools, getting support, being near their families, and a lot cheaper than they are by going to all over the country to agency placement. So that's our plan. But as I think Amanda was saying earlier on, we're in a very challenged position. So there's no guarantees that we will achieve all of the savings that we've set forward, but we've got to try, and we believe we can make this saving we've put forward today.
Okay, if there's no more questions or comments, thanks, Eddie.
Thank you. That's me done. I think
Thank you very much. Thanks for coming. Now we move on to the boss then. Councillor Fielding, leader. His section starts with the reduction in traineeship programme and then continues to Chief Executive section. Sean?
Yeah, thank you very much. Thanks, Chair. Good to see you this evening. I know it's always a long meeting, the budget one. I suppose I could do a lengthy preamble about how we don't want to be in this position and don't want to have to do anything like this, and certainly don't want to have to raise council tax. But I think many of my colleagues have covered that, and I think it's a given really, and members know that know our position on this. So I suppose I'll just go straight off into the proposals themselves, over which I have responsibility. So the first one around the reduction in the traineeship programme, that is, we're going to mitigate that by switching funding to the Kickstart scheme, which we recently had some good coverage about in terms of creating new jobs for young people. And so although there is a reduction in the budget for the traineeship programme, that's going to be made up for in funding from other places, so that's mitigated and takes the pressure off there. The corporate priorities is a budget adjustment with no loss of posts, legal staff, service reductions and reductions of posts in democratic services. One of the posts was done by VER, and many of these proposals like this are done by deleting vacancies. Similar with registrars. Digital mail does what it says on the tin. You'll get your mail digitally rather than hard copies if you're a member of staff. Creating a better place, it's a relatively good news story in that department, because a number of staff in that area have come forward with proposals about being repurposed. That's a dreadful way to describe a person, but being redeployed to do other things and using their expertise in other ways to support our ambitions around creating a better place, our capital investment programme. And so because that was a very well-designed piece of work that was bottom-up with taking suggestions from staff, it's something that has buy-in. And that's all of mine. I thought I had some more then, but those are all of mine. And if anybody's got any questions, I'm here, and as are the relevant officers.
Thank you. Thanks, Sean. Any questions or comments? Can I just ask, Sean, just about 8.2 million savings in total on creating a better place. I mean, that's a huge amount of savings that you're going to deliver. How confident are we that we will actually do that?
Well, I think, creating a better place has been brought back here before to discuss some of the changes that we've had to make as a result of COVID and some of the changes to the capital programme from which those savings will be derived. But I think in terms of the detail, it might be best if an officer comes in and just gives some reassurance that we are confident of delivering the savings in the report. Is it Helen or Emma on the call? Who's best place to do that?
Leader, I'm here. It's Emma.
Thanks,
Hi, Chair. Emma Barton, Director of Economy. Thank you. Good evening, everybody. We have presented the detail behind creating a better place to PVFM members as we were going through that review process. You helped us establish the principles, and then we brought the findings back to you in some detail. A lot of it linked to better use of our assets, a refreshed look at the way we use our buildings and our land in particular. It's enabled us to bring forward some brownfield areas which which could be redeveloped to help create jobs and to create opportunities for our people, as well as making sure we've got the right accommodation settings for all of the different services to be deployed in the future, with lots of lessons learned. Happily provide you with more detail, but obviously we have been through this in some depth, but if there's any further detail needed tonight, I'll gladly provide it.
Oh, that's fine. Thank you very much. Any other questions or comments? We're done with the leaders section then. Thank you very much, Sean. Thanks for coming. We next move on to printing reduction. I thought Sean has already done that. It says Hannah Roberts by digital platform rollout.
Proposal. Hello.
Hi.
It's a different proposal.
Oh, it's a different proposal. Right.
Yes,
Hannah.
yes, but it's subsequent to the investment we've made in the new uniform system, which is the administration system for planning.
Yeah.
Which enables us to make a separate saving around that. And again, it's a digital, so it is a saving, not a cut.
Right. Excellent. Well done. Any questions for Hannah? Comments? We agree to that then. Thank you. Councillor Brundridge, no, that's been done. We're on to Councillor Jabbar then.
Yeah, thanks, Chair. I've got 4 that's been listed under my name. So internal efficiency at Unity, that's giving us 780k. Transformation of the contact centre, 120k next year. Reduction in procurement staffing, and the finally the financial redesign of the department, giving us 389k. Apart from the transformation of the contact center, all these are back office operations, doesn't have an impact on the frontline services that we provide. I'm confident that we can deliver those. In terms of the contact center, clearly that's a radical move that we are trying to undertake. We have had a lot of discussion about this, and we've been given a lot of assurance about this proposal. And Dominic, who is the Managing Director of Unity Partnership, is here if there's any additional question, Chair, that you or colleagues need to ask. So I'll leave it at that. We've also got Anne Ryans and Helen Lockwood in terms of officers directly relevant to these 4 proposals. Thank you, Chair.
Right, thank you. Councillor, can I ask a question on this radical proposal that you said you have on transformation of contact center? How are you going to make sure that we have whole of the borough getting good quality service, and you don't have ups and downs or good or bad from one place to another? How are you going to make sure that everybody has got equal access?
Yeah, thanks, Chair. That's a good question that's been asked several times as we come through the decision-making process. I will come at the end to answer, well, give you my thoughts on it. But we've got Dominic Whelan with us. As I said, he's the MD for Unity Partnership. If I could bring Dominic in first, please, Chair, and then I'll come back in once he's finished. Thank you, Dominic.
Good evening, Chairman. Good evening, members. I think the simple answer, Chairman, is the proposal at the moment, as you're aware, that we did have until COVID, the single location for face-to-face contact for people coming in to deal with complex queries through Access Oldham. That has obviously not been open because of COVID, and we've been managing to provide the support to people via the online and telephone. The work's ongoing at the moment with colleagues to make sure that we integrate with the proposals to align with the place-based working, so that we will basically take the face-to-face offering out closer into the localities, and rather than people having to come in to Access Oldham, effectively we'll take appointments and we'll meet people out in locations in the borough, whether that's in a library or a town hall or whatever it happens to be. So in many respects, for many people, we should be offering an improvement because we should be able to access them closer to their homes. Also, I've introduced something similar before in other authorities, and we're introducing some new technology to supplement this. And with the appointments process, what I found before was that actually we do find quite a few people come in to have a face-to-face appointment and actually realise that they could have been dealt with on the phone quite happily. So we would expect normally that some of that will be dealt with via phone calls that would have otherwise have previously come into Access Oldham. Hopefully that answers that question, Chairman.
It does, yeah. Thank you very much, Dominic. That's very helpful. Can I ask Dominic or Councillor Jabbar, now once this is set in motion, can we have a feedback to this committee, maybe 6 monthly report or something after you implemented it, just to keep us abreast of what's going on and how it's developed?
Absolutely, no problem at all, Chairman.
Thank you. That'll be helpful as well.
Yeah, of course, Chair, we can do that. I think as well, Chair, what Dominic was saying about how people are now using different, primarily the digital service to access council, I think is a really important one. And I'm absolutely convinced that for a large group of users of our service, what we're proposing, it will enhance the way we contact with them, and it will provide a better service because we are increasing our IC capacity and we're changing our website and we're making tweaks behind the scene to make sure that the online service is much more smooth and is relevant to people's need. So I think as well as providing local services, I'm satisfied that what the office is suggesting in terms of a better digital offer, better online offer is there. And I've been briefed on it so many times because I had to be convinced myself of being a cabinet member for this area that this proposal was going to work. So yeah, we will welcome the opportunity, Chair, to come back to you after 6 months to see how this is rolling out. And if there are any teething issues, then we'll be happy to report those back to you as well.
Thank you, Councillor Jabbar. Garth?
Yeah, sorry, Chair. It's still in that section. It's a little bit very bad. I'm still learning to adopt to the digital model of following through all the paperwork online rather than on paper. But it was real. It's just on the bit about street lighting, the review of the street lighting contract, and that's pretty much all it says in there. Have we got any more details on what that entails?
Cara, you doing that?
Help answer that one. Yeah, the street lighting contract itself isn't coming under review. What it is, there is over provision of budget against that. The issue is that some years ago we had an awful lot of claims on the counter. The position with E.ON, who provide the service, is now in a much better space, and the amount of budget that's been provided against that to pay the contract is no longer needed, so it's felt that can be offered up as a saving.
Thank you. Any other questions? If not, I think that's all the items done. In that case, thank you very much to all the officers and members for their contributions, and we'll move on to item 7, Appendix 7, which is fees and charges. There's a list of each and everything we charge and what increase, if any, is being proposed.
So, Chair, do you want me to just say a few words of introduction on this one?
Yeah, very quickly, please.
Okay, so the fees and charges, Appendix 7, page 517 to 569, sets out the proposals for charges for 2021. So there has been a review of all the charges that we make to see whether it was appropriate to actually change the fee or the charge in view of the pandemic, to see whether there was a requirement to keep pace with specific cost pressures, whether the market can actually bear the cost, or whether it would be counterproductive. So all heads of service or service areas have looked in depth at the proposals, at the fees and charges, and there are some proposals So pages 140 to 151 of the main report do highlight in summary where there have been changes. I think it's fair to say that very many of the fees and charges, there's no proposal to change them at all, but there are some, and the report does highlight those where there are the biggest percentage increase. So, for example, school swimming service, lifelong learning service, where there is a charge because many of the services are free. School meals, there's a proposal to increase the price of a school meal for a child and an adult. Some cemeteries and crematorium charges, highways charges, and also some charges for security and waste and fleet management. But as I've indicated, the vast majority, there's either very, very small change or no change at all.
Thank you. Thanks, Anne. Any questions on any of the proposals? Any charges? We will get quite a few on this one. If not, we will move on to the next appendix then, which is Appendix 8, budget position, post-budget proposals. Anything to add, Anne, before we go into? No?
No, nothing on that one. It just reflects the position, assuming everything is
just updates where we are. Item 9, summary medium-term financial strategy position 21-22 to 23-24. Post proposals. Again, as I said, it's just an update of what she presented before, after the proposals. And finally, Appendix 10, pay policy statement 21-22. If we take that as read, has any member got any questions or comment? If not, can we go back to page 85? There is a series of recommendations printed. Somebody needs to move them and second them.
Move, Chair. I'll second, Chair.
Thank you. They moved and seconded, and we now need to take the vote. Can we have the roll call, please?
Sorry, Chair, it helps if I'm not on mute. Members, again, please can you indicate whether you are for, against or abstaining? Councillor Byrne?
For.
Councillor Hack?
For.
Councillor Hartness?
Abstain.
Councillor Fithian?
For.
Councillor Salamat?
For.
Councillor Shuttleworth?
For.
Councillor Stretton?
For.
And Councillor Ahmed?
For. So the recommendations are agreed. Thank you very much. Thank you all the officers and thank you all the cabinet members and the leadership. Thanks for that presentation. We now move on to item 8, which is housing revenue account. Hannah and Anne.
Thank you, Chair. So this is a report that PVFM receives every year, which reports on the current standing and performance of the housing revenue account over the past year and makes recommendations about rent increase, service charges and other costs. What we are recommending this year is that the count the rent. So these are the rents on the homes that we still own, which is basically the accommodation housing that's managed on our behalf by Housing 21, and the retained general needs housing. And the recommendation is that the rent increase should be the consumer prices index plus 1%, which is a total of 1.5%, while all other charges, including the service charge, continue to be frozen. And we just recover our costs where there are other costs. What I'd particularly like to draw the committee's attention to is in paragraph 210, which shows you the outturn for or the balance for this year, and that balance includes the expenditure that we have made by acquiring Primrose, the properties at Primrose, homes at Primrose Bank, which are referred to in the body of the report. I'm pleased to say that we've now taken possession of 7 of the new homes on Primrose Bank, which have had the additional energy saving measures installed under the Red Wolf programme, and the first 7 have now been let, which is really good news, and we're anticipating that the remaining 11 will be handed over to us by the middle of February. And then finally, just to draw your attention to paragraph 215, which shows the projection for the housing revenue account moving forward. Clearly, the income from the housing revenue account is, as it says, interest and investment income, but it's also the rents that are paid to us by our tenants. And the you can see that we're projecting that the balances will reduce, and then a big reduction in 23-24. This reflects the investments that we're making alongside the Flexible Housing Fund as part of creating a better place, and investing the revenue that we have, or the capital that we have accrued in the housing revenue account, in providing new homes while implementing our housing strategy. And while I suppose it's not usual for somebody to be really pleased about spending money, I am really pleased that we are getting on with investing this money in providing much needed homes for our residents.
Thank you. And you're recommending that we increase the rent by 1.5%?
I am, yes.
Yeah, thank you. Any questions or comments for Hannah? If not, we agree the recommendations? Do we need to take a roll call?
I'll do a quick roll call, Chair.
Yeah. Okay.
Councillor Byrne?
Yes, approved.
Councillor Hack?
Yes, agreed.
Councillor Hartness?
Agreed.
Councillor Fithian?
Agreed.
Councillor Salamat?
Agreed.
Councillor Shuttleworth?
Agreed.
Councillor Stretton?
Agreed.
And Councillor Ahmad?
Agreed.
That's unanimous, Chair.
Thank you. The recommendations are agreed. Thanks, Hannah. We'll move on to item 9, Capital Strategy and Capital Program 21-22 to 25-26. And we'll present the report. Sport.
Yes, thank you, Chair. So the report consists of a summary paper with a detailed capital strategy, which is attached at Appendix 1. The report and the strategy are very much in the style of previous years, and as you'll be aware, there is a requirement for us to produce a capital strategy, and we are obviously ensuring that everything that's included in the strategy complies with all the necessary codes of practice. It covers the period 21-22 to 25-26, so it's a 5-year timeline, but it also looks forward at a summary level for a further 10 years, from 26-27 to 35-36. But obviously, looking that far forward, it is very, very high level and sets out a direction and an intent. So the strategy itself is a high-level overview of how capital expenditure and capital financing and treasury management activities will contribute to the provision of services. It's an overview. There's an overview of associated risk and how that will be managed, and the implications for future financial sustainability are included, because clearly when we are undertaking prudential borrowing, we have to factor that into the revenue estimates in terms of financing that expenditure. The strategy is set out in 15 sections. We've got the principles of the capital strategy and a range of other areas, including the priority areas for investment, The resources to support the capital programme, which includes prudential borrowing and grant. And the key feature of our programme really is it's centred largely around the Creating a Better Place initiative, and we've touched on that in a few areas already. And that does encompass new schools, new homes, town centre and borough-wide regeneration, and really taking forward the future vision for the borough. In overall terms, we have £287 million, including expenditure programmed in this year, linked to that Creating a Better Place programme, with 250 million from in the 5 years from 21-22. I think it's important to point out that one of the major change which has actually had an impact on the way that we put the capital strategy and programme together for 21-22 and future years is something that came into effect from the 26th of November but had been signalled from March in 2020. And that was with regard to the way that we can access PWLB, Public Works Loan Board borrowing, which is the most effective and cheapest way of financing capital expenditure. So you'll probably be aware that the government has taken a dim view of many local authorities who've gone into commercial investment in a very extensive way. And so they are restricting in future access to PWLB resources. So you will not be able to access that funding if you have within your 3-year capital strategy an intent to undertake capital investment for a yield, for a commercial yield. So our strategy and programme has been realigned to ensure that we are able to access that central government source of funding. The summary capital plans are set out in the covering report, but in detail in Appendix 1, Annex C, which is on page 720. And that does highlight in overall terms that over the 5 years of the programme, we're looking to spend £340 million, with 84.1 million being the level of expenditure in 21-22. And that's being financed by ring-fence grants and unring-fence grants, nearly £34 million. A smaller sum of capital receipts, around £4 million. A very small contribution from other partners of £51,000. But the biggest area is prudential borrowing at almost £43 million, with a contribution from the HRA linked to what Councillor Roberts has just said for HRA capital investment. Over the future years, the programme it's perhaps a much more balanced programme than we've previously presented, as the sums of money, certainly in the first 4 years of the programme, that we're looking to spend are somewhat similar. So we've got 95 million for 22-23, then 74 million, falling a little bit to 62 million in 24-25, and finally 27 million in 25-26. So it's a balanced programme, fully funded, and I just also need to mention the flexible use of capital receipts. As indicated when we discussed the revenue paper, we are reliant on using capital receipts to fund transformational expenditure. So that's a flexibility that central government is allowing, and the strategy that we have to submit to central government to support that use is attached to the capital at Annex D. So happy to take any questions on that.
Thank you. Thanks, Anne. Any questions or comments? We need to move and second this report.
Move, Chair.
Second, Chair.
Thank you. We'll take a roll call.
Thank you, Chair. Councillor Byrne?
Approve.
Councillor Hack?
Approve.
Councillor Harkness?
Approve.
Councillor Fidian?
For.
Councillor Salamat?
For.
Councillor Shuttleworth?
For.
Councillor Stretton?
For.
And Councillor Ahmad?
For.
That's unanimous, Chair.
Thank you. That's item 9. Move on to item 10, Treasury Management Strategy. Back with you, Anne.
Yes, thank you, Chair. So this report is very much linked to the capital strategy that we've just been considering, because the Treasury activity of the Council is driven by our capital expenditure. The report was considered at the Audit Committee last week because the Audit Committee has the primary responsibility for scrutinising Treasury activities. But there is a requirement, one of the actual indicators, Treasury indicators that we have to report on, is the presentation of the strategy for scrutiny and then also through to Cabinet and Council. But we must present 3 reports a year, or at a minimum, the first one being the strategy, which is this report. And then there's also a mid-year review and an outturn report, which I'm sure you'll have remember receiving previously. It is very much a technical paper, I'm afraid, but it is a key requirement that we prepare it as such, and it does comply with all the codes of practice. It's been drawn up with all the prudential indicators calculated, having regard to the capital strategy and programme. It is only over a 3-year time frame, though, rather than the 5 years of the capital programme, because that is the requirement for a Treasury report. All the prudential indicators that the Council must calculate are in the paper and referred to at pages 737 and 739 of the pack. None of the indicators highlight that there are any areas of concern that need to be brought to members' attention, and all are within acceptable limits. The actual level of capital expenditure itself is one of the required indicators, and as we've just discussed, that's set at just over £84 million for 21-22. It is essential that the Council has a minimum revenue provision policy, and that statement is attached to Appendix 1 of the report. The current Treasury position and borrowing position and capital financing requirements are set out in the paper from page 740. It's estimated that the Council will have gross borrowing, including our PFI commitments, of £411 million at the end of 21-22. And we will have a capital financing requirement, which is our underlying indebtedness, of £525 million at the end at 21-22. As advised in the capital paper, we've restructured and considered our capital plans and will not be undertaking any activity purely for commercial yield, so there are none included and no indicators linked to that in our report. It's also important to highlight the operational boundary and the authorised limit. So the operational boundary is the maximum expected limit for external debt, and that's set at £516 million. And the authorised limit is the absolute maximum, and that's set at £541 million. But I think, as you can see from the report, we are nowhere near that level in terms of plans to spend. The prospects for interest rates are included in the paper, and there's quite a detailed commentary on the interest rates and activity taking place at present. The borrowing strategy and annual investment strategies are set out at page 749 and 750. And I think it's important to highlight our investment priorities, which are firstly security of capital, secondly liquidity of our investments, thirdly, optimum return, and finally, that we undertake ethical approach to investments. The report also highlights the range of investment instruments that we can use for 21-22, and they're set out at Appendix 5 under specified and non-specified investments. And the report also advises that we do take technical advice on Treasury management services from Link Asset Services. We use their creditworthiness services, and that's all detailed in the report at page 752. Our investment strategy always has regard to our core balances and cash flow, and we have regard to the outlook for short-term investment and interest rates. And we do set ourselves a target for a rate of return, but at this point in time, given the low interest rates, our targets are comparatively low. but it is one of our standard benchmarks, and it's something that we always discuss, but in particular with the audit committee. So I'll stop at that point. I recognise it is a technical paper, but happy to take any questions.
Thank you very much, Anne. Any questions or comments? If not, can we move the recommendations?
Move, Chair.
Second, Chair.
Second. Thank you. Can you roll call, please?
Thank you, Chair. Councillor Byrne?
4.
Councillor Hack?
4.
Councillor Harkness?
4.
Councillor Fithian?
4.
Councillor Salamat?
4.
Councillor Shuttleworth?
4.
Councillor Stretton?
4.
And Councillor Ahmad?
4.
Thank you, Chair.
That's agreed. We now move on to final item. Probably everything we discussed so far tonight all hangs on this next item. And statement of Chief Financial Officer and reserves robustness of estimates and affordability and prudence of capital investments.
Yes, thank you, Chair. You're quite right, actually, because if I wasn't able to make a statement that everything was robust, then a large part of the conversation previously would have been a bit of a waste of time. But it is prepared because in my role as Section 151 officer, I do have to comply with Section 25 of the Local Government Act 2003 and must prepare a report which does exactly as you said, comments on the robustness of estimates and the affordability and prudence of the capital investments. And clearly, the report also looks at the confidence, I suppose, I have with regard to the revenue budget and the level of reserves and balances. So the report doesn't comply with all the requirements, and I think it's interesting that various different authorities and Section 151 officers prepare their reports in a different way. However, this is the style that's been adopted here. The report looks at the level of balances that are recommended to support the budget and the approach taken with regard to assessing that level of balances is looking at 11 areas of risk, and they're detailed at appendices 1 and 2 of the report. It also looks at earmarked reserves, and clearly there's a close link to the budget report and the reliance on reserves to support the budget. So this is my comment on the fact that we have at this point in time sufficient reserves to support the budget process. However, we do have regard to the fact that we are relying a lot on reserves and do need to ensure that action is taken to deliver the savings that are set out in the report and deliver the transformation programme in future years. The report also looks at affordability and prudence of capital investment and on financial resilience, which of course is very topical at this point in time. And that's really to give members some confidence that I am aware of all of the issues. I'm particularly aware of some of the challenges that have taken place in other local authorities. As part of my role, it will be to ensure that any risk to Oldham Council is minimised in that regard. The report does make reference also to publications, codes of practice and comparative indices, which are all very important in the context of ensuring financial resilience of the Council. I am able to advise of the robustness of estimates and give members assurance about the 21-22 budget process and the capital programme, but as the report highlights, there are some risks, and clearly, as we've discussed otherwise throughout the agenda papers, really, that a lot of things are based on estimates, so it's best estimates at this point in time, but things can change. But as you know, we do have robust processes to highlight to members as soon as there is anything, matters of concern that need to be addressed and brought to their attention. So I'm happy to take any questions on that one at this point.
Thank you, Anne. Thanks for that presentation. That's very reassuring that you're keeping a watchful eye on our reserves, and it's concerned everybody, but that reassurance is very welcome. Any questions or comments before we agree the recommendations? Are the recommendations moved?
Move, Chair.
Thank you.
Second, Chair.
Second,
Thank
Chair.
you. Thank you. Can I have a roll call, please?
Thank you, Chair. This is the last one of this evening. Councillor Byrne?
For.
Councillor Hack?
For.
Councillor Harkness?
For.
Councillor Fidian?
For.
Councillor Salamat?
For.
Councillor Shuttleworth?
For.
Councillor Stretton?
For.
And Councillor Ahmad?
For.
That's unanimous, Chair.
Thank you very much. Thank you, all the members, all the officers. I know it's been a long night, but we've done very well. That was the final item on the agenda. So thank you very much for your attendance.
Thank you. Thank you,
Declare the
Anne.
meeting-
Thanks,
declare
Chair.
the meeting closed.
Thanks, Chair.
Thank you.
Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Chair.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Chair. Good night.
Good night.